Hello, everybody. Good afternoon from Queen's School of Business. My name is Xin He. I'm the moderator for today's section, Small Step to Sustainability. I'll be joined shortly by Dr. Jane Webster, but I will cover some early housekeeping stuff before we start the presentation. We encourage you to share the webinar invitation to your friends or colleagues. We have a sign-up form available on qsb.ca/webinar. It's easy to fill out, and you will receive the invitation each month to our webinar, which cover various business topics, and they're always free of charge. Today's section is recorded. You will receive the recording after 3 to 4 business days. In the recording, you will be able to hear the presentation as well as watching the slides. Again, you are very welcome to share the recording with your friends and colleagues who cannot join us today and may find this presentation useful. If you have questions, don't wait until the very end to ask, because that will make moderation very difficult. And please use the chat window or the Q&A window on the right-hand side of the screen to ask questions anytime during the event. But we will do the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So you can ask questions anytime, but we will answer them by the end of the section. And if you have a question, please direct it to me, the host, Xin He, and I will pass it around the table to Dr. Webster. If you have questions, but we don't have time to answer them today, please feel free to email Dr. Jane Webster after the event, and she'll be happy to answer your questions. If you are a Twitter user, you can tweet out today's session using #QSBWebinars. If you have any technical difficulties, the most common one that we got is audio will drop out during the presentation. So if your audio does drop out, it's usually momentarily. It will come back after a minute or two. But if it doesn't come back, please use the chat window to send me a message, and I'll be happy to help. And now I would like to introduce today's section leader. Dr. Jane Webster is a professor of Management Information Systems here in Queen's School of Business. Her current research concerns information system and technology to support environmental sustainability. She has also investigated impacts of technology for distributed work, team effectiveness, organizational communication, employee recruitment and selection, employee monitoring, and training and learning. In year 2003, Dr. Webster received the Queen's School of Business Research Excellence Award, and Dr. Webster has served as a senior editor for MIS Quarterly. Without further ado, I now pass the control to Dr. Jane Webster, who will lead us on the presentation today.
Thanks a lot, Xin. I'm really happy to be here today talking with you. And for my research, my current research, I'm very interested in initiatives, or as we call them in academia, interventions that can encourage employees to behave more sustainably. So there's been over 40 years of research on this topic, but the research has occurred in the home, in the community. There's hardly any research in the workplace on encouraging employees to act more sustainably. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to talk about some initiatives that you could consider for your workplace. So as Xin had mentioned, my background is in information systems. You may be wondering why someone in IS is talking about environmental sustainability. So in a few minutes, I hope you'll understand. But I will, throughout this talk, give you some examples from our research on encouraging employees to conserve energy with computer-related equipment. And this research has been conducted with one of my colleagues here at Queen's, Sandy Staples, with a professor in engineering here at Queen's, and with some colleagues at HEC Montreal and University of Laval. And this research has been supported by a grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So in terms of the focus of the webinar, this is the audience that I hope will be interested in the talk. Environmental champions motivating others in the workplace, employees just like you, wishing to increase your own pro-environmental behaviors, and leaders setting their organization's environmental vision and developing strategies to achieve this vision. Now, of course, organizations will have a portfolio of initiatives that are bigger and smaller. And some of them will be one-time changes like perhaps purchasing a more energy-efficient printer or installing a native plant garden instead of grass. And these are extremely important, but I won't be focusing on these one-time changes today. Instead, I'm going to focus on voluntary, repetitive behaviors by employees, like turning off equipment or bringing in waste-free lunches. So today we're just going to look at one piece of the puzzle in terms of addressing environmental sustainability. So why do I think this is important to you? I think it's important to you because it's the right thing for the planet. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to convince you of that. I think most organizations know now that there are risks out there for organizations in terms of water scarcity, climate change, and so on. But it's also important for you because it's going to help you address those three big HR issues, the HR issues of attraction, selection, and retention. So a recent survey has demonstrated that over 80% of organizations that actually focus on environmental sustainability have these positive benefits of creating a positive employer brand, increasing retention, and developing leaders. So before I go on and talk about specific behaviors, I want to ask you two questions. I want you to think about, in your organization, how could you engage employees to perform more pro-environmental behaviors? So my first question is even more specific than that, which is, and we're going to do a poll right now that Shin is going to send out to you. Do you think that providing employees with more knowledge will increase their pro-environmental behaviors? So just answer yes or no, and we're going to give you 30 seconds to answer. Do you think that if you give people more knowledge, this will help increase their pro-environmental behaviors? Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a second question. And in a moment, Shin is going to put that poll up for you. And the second question is like the first one, but it is stated as follows. Do you think that providing employees with rewards or incentives will increase their pro-environmental behaviors in the workplace? So again, please vote yes or no. And later on, a little later on in the talk, I'll come back to see what you said, and then I'll tell you what the research says about these two topics. Okay, so thanks for voting on those two questions, and as I said, we'll come back to them soon. Okay, I think we know that environmental sustainable issues are important in the workplace, and I think companies realize that now. They're making substantial investments in initiatives. For instance, sustainable business spending in the U.S. is forecasted to reach $43 billion this year. So even though organizations are spending a lot on these initiatives, they're actually struggling with how to implement and how to design these initiatives. So today I'm going to suggest some simple, cost-effective initiatives and how to design them. Before I do, most talks like this start with bad news. They tell you what is going on in the world that we should be worrying about. And so I'm going to have a couple slides about bad news and then move on to some better news. But the bad news, for instance, if we look at this graph, this map of the world, we can see CO2 emissions carbon dioxide emissions by country. We may be patting ourselves in the back saying, you know, Canada has that little circle. It's a lot smaller than some of the other circles around the world. We're not doing so badly in terms of CO2 emissions. However, if we look at those CO2 emissions per capita or per person, on the next map that I'm displaying now, we can see that the circle for Canada is just as big as most other countries, or bigger than other countries. So on a per capita basis, we're not doing that well. So that's just looking at CO2 emissions. Of course, there are other types of pollution and environmental degradation. For instance, this next map that I'm going to show you is a map that was just published last week in Nature. And it demonstrates mortality linked to outdoor air pollution in 2010. And this article also has projections for the future, like 2020, for instance, in terms of mortality. So you might have noticed in the bottom left of all these slides, I have a little source. So at the end of the talk, I'll have the complete references for all these sources. Any of them you want to look up at a later time, you can to get more information. So that's the bad news in terms of, for instance, CO2 emissions and air pollution. So what has this got to do with information systems in general and businesses? And we often think, when we're thinking about pollution and CO2 emissions, we think of air travel. We always give that as the example. Those are the bad guys. Those are the ones that, who are polluting. So I want to ask you another question. We're not going to poll this time, but just think to yourself. Are carbon emissions globally higher from air travel or from information technologies? And on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a little picture of a data center. Which do you think is higher, air travel or information technologies? Well, I've set this up for you that, yes, the correct answer is information technologies. We've already passed air travel in terms of carbon emissions. And by 2020, we expect that over 6% of worldwide carbon emissions will be coming from information technologies. So this is one of the reasons that I'm very interested in what we can do in organizations to reduce our carbon emissions because of the information technologies. For the last few slides, as I've mentioned, I've presented lots of bad news and overall bad news around the world. And this is how talks usually start. But what's the problem with this type of presentation in terms of motivating employees? The problem is this type of information is overwhelming to people. They don't see how they can make a difference with such a big problem. So climate change seems remote and abstract and uncertain. What can I do? So we often feel helpless. What can we do as individuals? So I would suggest if you want to motivate your employees, you don't give them the bad news like I just gave you. Rather, you give them concrete suggestions for what they can do to make positive changes. And that's what this talk is going to be about. So as I mentioned, I'm going to focus on small changes that can have big impacts. And I'm going to start with a case study of Sony, where they, over 6 months, saved over $11,000 by making very simple, straightforward, cost-effective suggestions to their employees. What kind of suggestions did they make? They made suggestions on reducing paper towel usage, reducing printing, increasing reusable dishes, the use of reusable dishes. So these are like straightforward, easy changes that resulted in over $11,000 in savings. And how did they do this? They actually used a third-party so-called employee engagement platform. They could have done it themselves, but they had third-party help. And this particular system provided feedback to teams. So within the teams, it gave team rankings. It provided a leadership board. It had live streaming of activity displaying other teams' progress. It also provided individual rewards. So when an employee performed well in terms of these behaviors, the employee might have a tree planted in their behalf, or they might get a nameplate, a green nameplate for their office. This system also listed top actions of employees, that is, those that had the biggest impact, and ones were things like skipping a trip and holding a virtual meeting. So that's what we're doing today. You didn't come here to listen to me. I'm doing it at a distance. Or reducing their computer's power consumption. So a lot of these high-impact behaviors, were actually related to computer equipment. So in our own research, we've also studied the effects of desktop video conferencing and reducing computer-related power consumption. So this is just one case, and I'm going to come back to it again, and I'm going to present other cases today of what organizations have done. So what kind of employee behaviors might you think of studying or changing in your organization? So I have a list of behaviors here on the screen, straightforward behaviors, and we came up with them by brainstorming with executives here at Queen's. The first one, again, is desktop video conferencing. Other behaviors are turning off lights, increasing composting at work, and so on. If you want to figure out specific behaviors for your organization, I suggest you brainstorm with your employees, because every organization, of course, is different and different possibilities for behaviors. For instance, at Queen's, we have a Green Office Certification Program. And the first step in this program is to have employees get together to discuss possible actions to implement in their group. Finding the actions is, or behaviors is one thing, but how are you actually going to engage people? How are you going to motivate people in your organization to take part in these initiatives? And that's what I want to focus most of this talk on, how you can engage employees in your initiatives. And I'm going to use a simple framework. This framework was adapted from a framework used in the community by Mackenzie Moore, who's a psychologist. And the first step in the framework is finding impactful behaviors. So previous slide, I had a list of behaviors, but how do we know which ones have an impact? In fact, people actually want to do the right thing. They just don't know what the right thing is often. So if you can develop a set of behaviors and then find out which ones have the most impact, then those are the ones that you want to encourage in the workplace. The second step is to identify barriers. So what barriers are there that are stopping employees from performing these behaviors? Third step, taking baseline measurements. We know from psychology that people don't always report accurately what they do. So by taking baseline measurements, I'm not suggesting you ask people, for instance, how much they recycle. I'm suggesting you measure how much people recycle. So we need to have a baseline, so we need to know where we are to see if we've made changes. And then step 4 is engaging employees. And this is where I'll draw on theories of persuasion, mostly from psychology, to engage employees. But people like Mackenzie Moore call these theories theories of social marketing or community-based social marketing. So what he's suggesting is we're using theories of persuasion for good, and that's why it's called social marketing instead of just marketing. We're not trying to sell anything, get someone to buy something. We're trying to get someone to change their behavior. So this red circle I'm going to spend most of the time on. Once we've initiated our intervention, then we want to continue to measure and monitor to see if the interventions had an effect, and so on. So this is a framework. I'm going to step you through it. As I said, spending most of the time on step 4. Okay, step 1, how do you find the most impactful behaviors? So you may be wondering why I have a picture of a clothesline here. I have a picture of a clothesline because, as I mentioned, most of the research has been done in the community, and there's 40 years of research of people going out and measuring how much you can save, for instance, by hanging your clothes outside instead of putting them in the dryer. So on the bottom left, I have a source called Dietz et al. And Dietz et al., I suggest you go to that article and look it up. You can see whether you would save more energy by hanging your clothes up for 5 months of the year versus, for instance, turning the heat of your washing machine down to cold from your regular temperature. So you can see how many watts of energy on average you would save. And there's a whole set of most impactful behaviors for the home. And so we know quite a bit about that. For instance, in that article, it also will tell you how much you can save if you change your driving behavior, if you reduce your acceleration rate and unnecessary braking, if you reduce your idling time, and so on. But we don't have that list for organizations or for offices. We don't know what the most impactful behaviors are. So what we need to do is, as I mentioned, we need to measure and figure out what those impactful behaviors are in the workplace. Another problem is that as employees, we don't really ever receive feedback on how much energy we use or how much we're polluting or how much we're recycling. But at home, I get an energy bill every month. Or if I have a smart meter, I may be able to go online with my utility and see what I'm using for energy much more frequently. So as a homeowner, I get frequent feedback on how I'm doing. I can look in my recycling bin and see how much I'm recycling and how much garbage I'm putting out. But in the workplace, I don't get any feedback on how much energy I use. I don't know. Like, did it make sense for me to turn off my lights when I came to this webinar in my office, or was I just, as my uncle used to say, it takes more energy to turn the light off and on than to leave it on, which of course is not true. But we don't get the feedback of the most impactful behaviors in the workplace. So what we need to do is determine those for the specific behaviors that you want to investigate in your organization. So for our research, as I mentioned, we looked at computer-related equipment and how people could reduce their energy using this equipment. And we really didn't know what we could send out to people for tips on what to do. We did a search on the internet, and there were things like people said, you know, make sure if you're not using the internet, you're not watching a YouTube video, turn all that off on your computer and just keep the applications open that you're using at the moment. So that was one tip. Another tip was, you know, turn off your printer when you're not using it. If you have external monitors, turn them off when you're not using them. But we didn't know which ones were most impactful to suggest to other people. So just think to yourselves, what do you think is has a higher energy saving? Turning off your external computer monitor or turning off your personal printer? So we figured this out very easily. We figured this out that it was an external computer monitor by using a $30 watt meter. This is something you can just get at the hardware store. You plug it into the wall, and then you plug your equipment into it. So 7 or 8 of us who had all different models of laptops, computers, monitors, printers, external disk drives, we just you know, spent a couple hours plugging and unplugging or turning on and turning off this equipment to see how much energy it used. And we found that turning off your external monitor is a way that we would suggest that you go, because it uses 3 times as much energy on average across all these models than turning off your personal printer. What are other ways you could do it? So you may not be measuring energy, you may be measuring something else. There are a lot of sustainability calculators out there, free sustainability calculators that you can use, or you could hire a consultant if you don't feel confident in measuring some of these behaviors yourself. However, what I've got on the screen is something you can't read, but I just put it up here as an example of a sheet from a sustainability calculator. And this is one that we developed ourselves for organizations, for them to decide, how much would we save if we went to desktop video conferencing instead of, X or Y meetings. And so we did a cost-benefit analysis, and that's what you can, a little graph you can see on the left-hand side. And we calculated the CO2 emissions equivalents that would be saved by going to desktop video conferencing. So this is a more complex behavior. You might be able to see little tabs along the bottom. I'm just clicking on the executive summary tab at the moment. The last tab is assumptions. So this is an interactive Excel spreadsheet where you can put in your assumptions. For instance, we put in particular assumptions, how much it costs to buy a desktop video conferencing camera for your system. And so you can go in and change the cost of that and so on. So I'm not trying to convince you to use our particular sustainability calculator, but I'm trying to describe to you that there are supports out there for determining which behaviors are most impactful. Simple ones like using a $30 watt meter, using a sustainability calculator like we have developed, or hiring or getting some help in to help you determine that. For instance, at Queens, we've had several courses where we've sent students out to organizations, and they've done this exact thing for free, of course. You don't pay the students, but they've determined which is the best way to go for organizations. So there's lots of help out there for this step one. The step two of the framework that I displayed earlier was identifying barriers. And I'll just give you a simple example right now. When we were studying our computer-related equipment, and one of the obvious recommendations, one of the best behaviors to save energy is this, to turn off the equipment. But we noticed people, they might turn off their computer at the end of the day, but they wouldn't turn off their monitor, or they may not turn off their printer. It's because all this equipment has all these turn on-off switches in odd spots, maybe it's way behind and so on. It just wasn't easy for them to turn it off. So we simply got a power bar, plugged everything into that, put the power bar next to the person, and they could easily turn off everything at the end of the day. So we determined that through just observations. So that's one way to identify barriers to particular behaviors. Another way is to search the literature. You may have a practitioner type journal or newsletter where you're going to see people talking about these issues. Or you can just ask your employees. You can conduct focus groups or surveys to determine these types of behaviors that have barriers attached to them. There's been a lot of research on this for recycling. So recycling, they've determined, for instance, the location of the recycling bin, if it has a lid or not, if the lid has a hole in it that's shaped like the piece of material that's supposed to go in it, whether there's labeling on it, whether labeling is detailed or confusing, and so on. But for us, I think in organizations, we can't go necessarily to that literature all the time to find out what the barriers are. We may have to observe or to ask. So we saw that even in an organization that we were studying. You can also find behaviors that employees should perform or their barriers. For instance, we were in an organization that had a really strong culture of sustainability. Everybody had reusable bottles, for instance, and people were really careful with what they did. But we noticed sort of in the corner of one of these rooms, there was a shared computer that was always seemed to be left on blinking, and no one would notice that it hadn't been turned off. So just by management, by walking around, may be important for finding out what the barriers are and to discover some potential behaviors. Step 3 is to take these baseline measurements. And if possible, the best way to do this is to link the measurement to a particular individual. So if you can link my energy usage to me and provide feedback to me on it, you're going to have the biggest impact in terms of changing behaviors. Often this isn't possible. For instance, for electricity usage, we've had students study that on campus here at Queens. And some of our buildings are so old, they're connected on the same meter. Some buildings have their own meter, so we have, of course, buildings of different ages. So we could track to a building. So if we put an initiative, for instance, in this building, we could track over time and see what the changes were by building, but it couldn't tell me in my particular office how much I've changed. So think about whether you can track particular measurements to individuals. Again, we've had students study recycling on campus, and they've done so-called dumpster diving, where they've gone in and measured the amount of garbage, the amount of recycling. So you may be able, for instance, to have someone to go around with your janitorial staff for a few days to take baseline measurements in garbage pails and recycling bins. But taking baseline measurements is very important because, as I said earlier, people often don't report what they actually do for various reasons. Okay, so let's get to this step 4. This is a step that I had read on the initial framework. And I want to ask you another question. We're not doing a poll on this because I've already got the poll's results in front of me here. So this is a question that I asked you. How about making employees more knowledgeable? Do you think this will actually change their behaviors? And so an example would be telling employees that recycling is good for the environment, that recycling would save the company money, it would save them picking up so much garbage and paying for haulage fees and so on. So that's an example of providing more knowledge to employees to help motivate them to, for instance, recycle more. So 89% of you said yes to providing knowledge. But the research actually supports the arrow going in the other way, in the other direction. And let me explain. If you provide people with more knowledge, this doesn't sort of get them over that tipping point of changing their behaviors. Yes, they understand that recycling is important, but it doesn't actually engage them. They need to know concrete things that they should be doing, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. In fact, Mackenzie Moore, whose framework I mentioned earlier, he actually argues that if you can get people to change their behaviors, they'll start thinking of themselves in a different way. So if I get Shin here to do more recycling, whatever way I get her to do that, then she starts thinking of herself, oh, I actually am a recycler. And then when I present her with knowledge, she's going to be more open to that message because it fits better with the way she sees herself. So a lot of initiatives and organizations are just providing knowledge. And providing knowledge is great, but it needs to be paired with something else to really get people to change. And so I would suggest that you try to get people to change, and then you provide the knowledge. My other question was, what about providing rewards to employees? And 74% of you said yes. And I would agree that providing rewards or incentives works really well to change behavior. Works really well. The problem is, once you stop giving those rewards, the behavior often stops. So that's what you need to think about. I would argue that you should not give rewards or incentives to individuals because they're doing the behavior for the incentive, not because they think it's a good thing to do. Okay? So generally, unless you're going to reward them forever, okay, so every time Shin puts a piece of paper in the recycling bin and I give her a quarter, well, I'm going to be giving her a quarter as long as she works here, right? So that's something to think about. So what really works to engage employees? As I mentioned earlier, providing feedback to people on how they're doing is important. If I know how I'm doing, then I can actually change my behavior. I may not, I never realized, for instance, I was so happy when I got an external monitor for my laptop, so I could be, looking at paper on one thing and looking at my PowerPoints on the other. And I thought, this is so great, until I realized how much these external monitors used. And I didn't know that until I got the feedback on my energy usage. So providing feedback is very important, and it's often part of other interventions too. And this example I have up here is based on a study that we're doing right now. And what we have done is developed an app, and the app works on a smartphone or a tablet. And the app has a metaphor of a garden. And the garden grows when the employee is using less energy, and it starts to die when they use more energy. In fact, it dies so badly it bursts on fire at the worst level on the right-hand side. So these are two diagrams of the worst level and the best level. In this particular system, we have a piece of equipment called a Pro Meter. In the Pro Meter, we connect to people's computer-related equipment, like their printers and monitors and computers. And this Pro Meter continuously communicates with a database. And every 5 minutes, we update the person's state of their app on their smartphone or tablet. So we're providing them with feedback. And this system is a little bit interactive too. It's not just feedback. On the left-hand best garden state, you can see a bird at the top. So the people can click on these icons and the bird, for instance, will fly around. And it also provides tips. So as I mentioned, knowledge is good once people are sort of open to that knowledge. So these tips are a tip of the day, and anytime you want to click on it, it'll give you a suggestion for what you can do to save energy. So as I said, we're still collecting this data at the moment, and here's some of the results for this particular study. So we standardized the data, so these are like standard units on the left-hand side, because the employees we studied had vastly different equipment. Some people had, monitors the size of TVs, and other people didn't have them. So we standardized them so the baseline would be 0. 2 weeks, we measured people's energy use. And then 2 weeks, we gave them the app. And that's what's called the intervention. So you can see that there was a decrease in energy usage when people received the app. And then for 2 weeks, we took the app away from them. Probably you wouldn't take an app away from them in real life, but we wanted to see what would happen if we took it away from them. And you can see that the behavior starts to creep back up. That is, the energy reduction isn't as big post-intervention as it was with the intervention. So if any of you, at another time want to talk to me about the study or take part in the study, we'd be happy to speak with you. Okay, so that's feedback. What are some other things that are impactful? Well, I've got 3 things on the screen here that are most impactful in the community. And I would like to suggest that we could use them in the workplace too, or combinations of these. So again, using multiple initiatives or multiple interactions often has a bigger effect than just using individual ones. And I'm going to start with social norms and modeling. And social norms are sets of beliefs about what other people are doing or what they approve or disapprove of doing. So here we can see a picture of a nice tree-lined street with recycling bins. So with recycling bins, you can look and see, if your neighbors put theirs out, if they, put garbage in them, how often they put them out. And these types of visible norms or invisible ones, like if we knew how much they recycle, they really affect what we do. So in our lives, we're really guided by what others think is correct, as well as by their behaviors. And similar people sort of strengthen this effect. So if it's a friend who's doing it, or if it's someone who's an authority or an expert, or even a movie star, these types of people have an effect on how we behave. So there's a researcher called Schultz, and he did a study where this was in California, where they already had recycling, and they wanted to increase the recycling. So he actually studied 600 households over 12 weeks. And he had 4 weeks where he measured how much they recycled, 4 weeks intervention, and a 4-week follow-up period. And so he had actually 3 what we call treatments or interventions. So he had a control group where he did nothing. He had an information or a knowledge-only group where he hung little things from people's doorknobs saying, you know, these are the types of things you recycle, these are the things you don't recycle, and so on. So it was the information group. And then he had what he called a normative feedback group. So a normative feedback group, he provided descriptive information about the number of neighbors participating and how much they were recycling on average. So he gave accurate information about how much their neighbors were recycling. And this is what he got for his results. So on the graph, the control condition is the blue one. So didn't see too much uptake on recycling. Information only is the black one, and the normative feedback condition is the red one. So in fact, with the red one, he found a 19% increase in recycling for normative feedback. So basically, you're telling people what other people they respect are doing or people like them are doing. And this can have a really big effect on behaviors. I want to give you 2 other examples of social norms too, because the one I just gave you with recycling bins, that's a visible behavior. So you can walk around and see what your neighbors are doing, and you know that they can see what you're doing, so that may change your behavior. But there's been a psychologist called Cialdini, and he's done a lot of studies on using social norms. And one of his famous studies had to do with towels in hotel rooms. And we're all used to going into hotel rooms now, and we see that card that says, you know, please reuse your towels. It's good for the environment. You know, hang them up, and if they're hung up, we won't replace them for you. And he wanted to make a very small change to that card that we all get in hotel rooms now. And the small change that he made was he said something to the effect that the majority of other guests who have stayed in this room have reused towels. So he added that very simple message to the typical message that we receive in hotel rooms. And what was the difference between receiving the typical card and the card that said, you know, others reuse towels? He found that 33% more guests reused their towels when he added that small message to the cards. So social norms have a very big effect. But he has also studied electricity usage in homes, and that's why I have that electricity monitor up there on the screen. And he found something that's called a backfiring effect. And he did the same thing as he did with towels, but he gave people accurate information about how much electricity their neighbors were using on average compared to them. And what he found was that when those householders used less than their neighbors, and they found out they used less, then they were more likely to increase their electricity usage because they were, oh, I'm doing so much better than other people. So this really backfired. So there's been a set of research that has looked at how can we eliminate this backfiring. And Cialdini was one of the people who came up with one of the solutions. He gave the same information that people were using less energy than their neighbors, and then he put a smiley face beside that. So he was giving positive feedback. And just by putting that smiley face on the feedback, he eliminated that backfiring effect. So I would suggest thinking about using social norms in the workplace. The second one I want to suggest you use is providing prompts. So prompts are just visual or auditory aids that remind us to carry out an activity. They don't tell us why we should do it. They just ask us to do it, and they're always proximal to the behavior. So we often now see stickers on light switches. And that's because the sticker is placed there. It's right beside the behavior. So if you happen to glance over there, you're going to follow the suggestion and turn off the light. So let's look at one case study of providing prompts. And again, this was in the home. And in this particular study, they were looking at trying to reduce water usage in the home. And they put stickers in showers. So instead of having the sticker next to a light switch like the previous slide that I showed to you, they put the sticker in the shower. And you can see the sort of dramatic differences in terms of amount of water used when there was a prompt versus not a prompt. So this is something that's costs very little that can help engage employees in your suggested pro-environmental behaviors. The next one I want to move to is goal setting. And any of us who took a psychology course or organizational behavior course, remember goal setting is a pretty powerful way to help change behaviors. And so the suggestions are you choose specific, difficult, attainable goals to help change behaviors. In the environmental sustainability area, they've suggested we go even further than just setting goals in the workplace, because just think about the workplace. We have so many competing goals. Maybe half of you are reading your email right now and doing other things. And there are so many changing and competing goals that even though we have the best intentions to act sustainably, often other things sort of push that away. So now researchers are looking at going beyond goal setting and actually setting plans or creating strategies for how you're going to carry out those goals. So in terms of not just setting goals, we suggest that we have people plan when, where, and how they're going to accomplish these actions. So they actually write down, you know, when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And this type of developing a plan is used to help break sort of unwanted habits and develop new habits. So again, we've done some research on goal setting in organizations and how that can affect people's energy use. And here's some results of a study from one of my undergrad thesis students last year. So again, she measured baseline energy usage, this time just with that cheap watt meter, and then for 2 weeks, and then for 2 weeks, she had people set goals and develop plans for how they carry out the goals. So you can see that developing the plans worked a little bit better than just goal setting, but they both resulted in reductions in energy use. So again, this is, I think, a straightforward, easy intervention that you can use. So those are the three main interventions that I wanted to talk to you about today. But an emerging intervention is one that's called gamification. And I showed you that Sony case study in the beginning where they had, pretty substantial monetary savings with straightforward behaviors. And they used gamification, which is the application of game design elements in non-game products or services, like work-related products or services or software. And so they had elements that you see in a game when you play, like rankings and leadership board and comparison to others. So I would suggest, thinking about whether you want to add gamification to any of your interventions. They also had individual rewards, and I talked before about how when you take the reward away, the behavior often stops. So again, I would think carefully about that, but what I liked about their case study is the reward wasn't monetary to an individual. For instance, it was planting a tree in the individual's honor, and so the tree is always going to be there. The employee can always go out and see their tree, and it's a gifting to something else to support the environment. So again, we're doing some research on gamification, and we'd be happy to talk to any of you about that. I know we don't have lots of time left, so I'll just skip through the remaining steps. So you have to continue to measure and monitor. We've measured paper usage, but you need to see if your intervention has worked. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is to think about the longer-term effects of interventions. I've already mentioned removing rewards, but this is this undergrad thesis student's results with one more time period post-implementation. So you could see that post-implementation, people's behaviors are starting to creep back up. So we're conducting a study this term in terms of how we can make those plans even stronger. How can we overcome those barriers? And we're working on that this term so that this creeping up to original levels doesn't occur. So in summary, I suggest that you brainstorm with your employees now. Think of actions that you could take, find the most impactful behaviors, and go through this cycle. Again, if you don't feel confident doing it on your own, there are academics out there who would love to partner with you. We're not like consultants. We don't charge anything. And so we're always looking for sites to do research, and we would be happy to work with you. So these are the resources that I mentioned that would be on the last slide. So these resources, for instance, the first one is this Cialdini one where I talked about using towels in the hotel rooms and so on. If you had to buy one book from this list of references, I would suggest that. It's an excellent book that talks about theories of persuasion in psychology and how you can actually apply them in real life. So I'm going to turn this over to Xin, and she's going to hand me some questions now. So the first question is, please let us know how we can convince our organization to spend money on sustainability. Well, that's a really great question. I think most of the examples that I've given you today, you're not actually spending money, you're saving money. So you might want to do a cost-benefit analysis. And that's where something like the sustainability calculators that we've developed and that other people have developed, we determine how much money you're going to save, and that's going to help convince the organization. And we also calculate your CO2 equivalent savings. And so organizations now are tracking things like this. A lot of organizations belong to the Global Reporting Initiative, and so they're very interested in being able to talk about what they've saved. So I think you should start small and do the cost-benefit analysis. Okay, so the second question I have here is the external monitor example. What consideration would you give to balance productivity versus increase in energy use? Well, I'm not suggesting you always turn off your external monitor. Like when I was developing this webinar, I turned on my external monitor because I really needed it. I was looking at, research from all different journals, and I was going back and forth. Of course, you need this for productivity at certain times, but I would argue lots of times we don't need that external monitor. And lots of times we leave it turned on when we go to lunch and so on, when we could turn it off. Okay, here's another great question. Should promoting sustainability be driven by the top or by the floor-level employees? I think the answer is both. But you don't have to have it driven from the top. Some of the organizations we've gone in to study, it was actually driven by, I would say, middle-level management. We've studied projects in depth, and one of the organizations we studied, that was most surprising, they had a zero culture of sustainability. You know, it was all the bottom line. But at the project level, the middle managers, if it was important to them, whenever they got a chance, they would try to build sustainability into their projects. But they would always sort of take a learning orientation to making these decisions. They wouldn't just say, you know, sustainability is always the answer. They would learn about what was best for a particular part of the project. So, I mean, it's great if you can have it driven from the top and from the bottom, but I think both is the best. Okay, another question. Can we reward for the short-term period to encourage behavior that will become habit or the norm? I wouldn't try to do that unless the reward is something like that Sony case where it's a different type of reward, or a nice type of reward is gifting to others. So let's say Shin is a really good recycler, and so I want to reward her, but my reward to her is that I'm going to give her $100 that she can donate to any charity of her choice, let's say. So that's a reward that's gifting to others, and so she's not doing it for her own personal benefit. And the reward is sort of consistent with what we're trying to accomplish. Another question. How does social norm apply to the office environment? Well, I argue that you probably don't want to make maybe people's performance public, individual performance public, but you probably would like to make maybe department's performance public. So maybe you want to create competition between different departments in your organization, or you want to have norms of the way that we do things in organizations. So if there's someone that respected, like the chief executive in your organization, and you see him coming in to work on his bicycle, that's a norm that's going to affect you, right? So you might have thought, oh, I don't want to get to work all sweaty and stuff, but you see, you know, some top executives or someone else in your organization you respect doing that, then it can have a big effect. Okay, so the last question is, where can I read more about the ProMeter device that hooks up to a computer? So, Shin, where should I post this information about the ProMeter?
I think if people that have these questions, feel free to email Dr. Jane Webster. Her email address is jwebster@queensu.ca. So feel free to email her, and she will be able to provide you for the information on where you can find it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So again, you are going to receive the recording after 3 to 4 business days, where you can see the slides and find out more about the resources. We thank Dr. Jane Webster for a great presentation today, and we thank everybody for joining us. Feel free to share the recording after you receive it with your friends and colleagues who may find this useful. And again, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.